Charleston's skyline was bathed in the soft orange glow of a summer sunset, the harbor lights beginning to twinkle as the evening air carried the faint scent of salt. I stood near the railing of the rooftop terrace, watching gulls drift lazily over the water. Gavin's 40th birthday had been planned down to the last champagne flute by his wife. Tessa, every detail polished for photographs and approval from their curated circle. A live jazz trio played at one end, and waiters in crisp white shirts moved gracefully between clusters of guests with trays of oysters and sparkling wine. Gavin, already on his third glass, held court in the center like a man accustomed to attention. Then, in that confident, careless tone he had perfected over the years, he turned toward me. "So, Mom," he said loudly enough for his friends to hear, "how does it feel to be a loser? Retired? No big house? No exciting career anymore?" The ripple of laughter that followed was sharp and bright. Bouncing off glass walls and polished smiles, my fingers tightened around my glass of sparkling water. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Instead, I reached into my clutch and drew out a red envelope. Heads tilted, curious. Gavin's eyes narrowed slightly. He knew what it was, the mystery investor money he had been bragging about for weeks, meant to fund his firm's next expansion. I laid it carefully on the table between us. "That investor was me," I said, my voice steady, but low enough that he had to lean in to catch every word, and I just withdrew the funding. The laughter stuttered into silence. A man from Gavin's firm shifted his weight, glancing between us like he'd stumbled into the wrong conversation. Even Tessa's perfect smile faltered. I held Gavin's gaze. "Let's see how you laugh when this loser freezes every dollar you touch." For a long beat, the only sound was the clink of a wine glass somewhere behind us. Gavin tried to smirk, but the color had drained from his face. I stepped back, letting the music and chatter of the party swallow the moment. Inside, I already knew what my next call would be, and exactly which doors I was about to close. 12 years earlier, my world had been smaller and quieter, shadowed by the loss of Samuel. The sale of our coastal coffee shops had been both an ending and a lifeline, a way to close one chapter and secure the next. I had no grand plans for the money beyond keeping my own roof steady and my future modest. Then Gavin and Tessa came to me, their voices low and urgent over my kitchen table. The mortgage was crushing them. Gavin's design business was barely more than sketches and borrowed office space. Aria was too. Miles only a few months old. I didn't hesitate. I paid off their mortgage in one transfer, co-invested in Gavin's firm, and wrote the first tuition checks for the private academy they'd set their hearts on. At first, the gratitude was raw and genuine, tearful thank yous over Sunday pot roasts. The children's crayon drawings taped to my fridge. Tessa arriving with homemade pies just because. The years passed, and those gestures thinned. Gratitude became comfort, and comfort became assumption. Gavin spoke at parties as though he had built his success unaided. Tessa filled her social media with snapshots of pristine kitchens, luxury vacations, and children in neatly pressed uniforms, each caption hinting at a life they'd earned. My name was never in the story. I didn't need the credit, but I did need the respect. When I first invested in Gavin's firm, my attorney had insisted on a detailed agreement. Gavin, eager for the cash infusion, signed without reading closely. Buried in the fine print was a single clause I could withdraw my share and freeze the operating account without notice. It was a precaution then, nothing more the kind of quiet safeguard a cautious widow keeps in her back pocket. That paper had lived in my safe for over a decade, untouched. I'd told myself I would never need to use it, but as I left the rooftop party, and the sting of his laughter still sat in my chest, I knew the time had come to test just how much power that signature really gave me. By morning, I would have my answer, and so would Gavin. When I returned from the rooftop, the house was still and dark, the harbor breeze moving softly through the half-open windows. I didn't bother changing out of my dress. I went straight to my office, flicking on the brass lamp that had lit so many late-night decisions. The walls were lined with nautical paintings Samuel had loved, each one a reminder of the tide's calm one moment, dangerous the next. Against the far wall, my file cabinets sat in precise order. I opened the safe and removed the thick folder marked Holloway Interiors. Agreement. The clause was there in black and white, exactly as my attorney had drafted it all those years ago. Gavin's signature was bold and careless, the kind of flourish you make when you think you'll never need to worry about the details. I dialed Meredith Voss, my attorney, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. "We're activating the clause," I told her. There was no need for further explanation. By the time I stepped into her old brick office downtown, the streetlights were just flickering out over Meeting Street. Meredith slid a stack of documents across her desk, and together we went point by point. The capital account would be frozen, Gavin's draw privileges revoked, vendor payments suspended pending my review. Then we listed the other levers he seemed to have forgotten I controlled the joint ownership on their Folly Beach rental. The tuition trusts for Aria and Miles. The small business line of credit I had personally guaranteed. Every one of them could be tightened or severed with my signature. I signed each page slowly, my pen steady. By sunrise, the paperwork was filed in less than 24 hours. Gavin's operating cash flow would be down to whatever loose change he actually earned. And when the bank called to ask about the sudden freeze, they would be speaking to him long before they heard from me. By Monday morning, the first cracks had widened into chasms. The freeze had taken effect at dawn, and by 9 o'clock, Gavin's payroll checks had bounced. I could imagine the scene in his sleek office employees huddled near the glass doors, voices tight with worry, and the phone ringing off the hook. Before noon, I heard the low growl of his charcoal Mercedes tearing up my driveway. He didn't bother parking straight. The car door slammed, and moments later, he was striding toward me, jaw tight, eyes blazing. "Did you freeze my accounts?" he demanded, stopping at the bottom of my porch steps. I didn't move from where I stood. "I just stopped financing your overspending," I said evenly, my hands resting lightly on the railing. "That money was for business operations," he snapped. "And yet, somehow, it funded private wine tastings and a ski trip to Aspen labeled as team building." His brow furrowed in confusion, or maybe guilt. I hadn't planned to mention what I'd just learned, not yet. But an email had arrived that morning from a former employee of his, someone I vaguely remembered meeting at a holiday party years ago. She'd laid out a tidy list of expenses Gavin had approved in the past year, $4 to $100 for a single wine weekend in Napa, billed under client entertainment. $9 to $800 for a ski resort package complete with luxury chalet, entered as staff development. The words in her email had been crisp but laced with quiet anger. "I thought you should know what he's been doing with your money." Gavin's mouth opened as if to argue, then closed again. For the first time in years, he looked less like a man in control and more like someone trying to calculate how much trouble he was in. "You have no idea what you've started." "Mom," he said finally, his voice low. "I think I do," I replied. He turned without another word. Stalking back to the Mercedes, I stayed on the porch, watching the car disappear down the road, knowing this was only the first of many revelations yet to come. 2 days later, I ran into Tessa at the corner cafe. She was in line ahead of me, her posture stiff, phone clutched tightly in one hand. I caught only fragments of her conversation with another mother from the kids' school, hushed but sharp. Something about ridiculous rumors and people don't know the full story. Later, I heard from a friend who'd been sitting near her table. Tessa had overheard two women at the next booth whispering about Gavin's financial trouble and the possibility that Holloway Interiors was circling the drain. By the time she got home, she'd marched straight into their kitchen and demanded answers. Gavin, of course, denied everything. He blamed me instead, saying I was trying to ruin their reputation out of spite. It was easier for him to make me the villain than admit he'd been living on borrowed image for years. That afternoon, while picking up produce at the market, I ran into Mark Ellis, a mutual acquaintance who supplies custom woodwork for several local businesses. He leaned in close, voice low. Gavin's been late on my invoices for months. He said, I thought it was a temporary cash flow thing, but now, well, I hear your monthly transfers were keeping a lot of vendors quiet. I thanked him, though the words left a bitter taste. Every check I'd written in support had been another layer of plaster over cracks Gavin refused to repair. That evening, Aria called. Her 10-year-old voice was careful, testing the edges of what she could ask. Grandma, why didn't you come to Sunday brunch? Daddy said you were busy. I told her I'd just had things to take care of, steering the conversation toward her latest art project. Still, after we hung up, I sat for a long time staring at the quiet glow of my phone screen, feeling the familiar pull to step in to make sure she and Miles never paid the price for their parents' choices. The question wasn't whether I could protect them, it was whether I could do it without undoing everything I'd just put in motion. By the end of the week, the whispers had grown into a steady hum. Charleston's small business Facebook group was buzzing with threads about Holloway Interiors in crisis, each post thick with speculation. Some blamed the economy. Others hinted at management issues. Gavin, predictably, stayed silent online. But I knew his version of events was being told in person, and in his version, I was the architect of their misfortune. Saturday morning, at the farmer's market, I was selecting peaches when Linda Barrett, a neighbor with a talent for knowing everyone's business, stepped into my path. Clarice, she said, with a little too much brightness. Is it true? Gavin's business is, well. In trouble, I placed the fruit gently into my basket before answering. People eventually learn the truth, I told her with a smile. It was the same tone I'd used discussing the weather. But her expression shifted, as if she'd heard more in my words than I'd spoken aloud. That afternoon, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened my email. One subject line stopped me cold inquiry from Charleston Business Journal. The message was from a young reporter named Daniel Cross. He explained he was working on a piece about sudden payroll failures at Holloway Interiors and wanted to include my perspective. I read the email twice. Speaking to him could end Gavin's version of the story before it rooted itself too deeply. But it could also shatter what was left of his reputation in the community, something no amount of public apology could fully repair. I closed my laptop, leaning back in my chair. The leverage I had wasn't just in frozen accounts and legal clauses. It was in choosing the moment to let the truth breathe. If I spoke too soon, it would look like revenge. If I waited, the cracks might spread far enough for Gavin to finally see them for himself. Outside, the late afternoon light slanted across the harbor, and I knew my silence would be noticed. The only question was whether I'd use it as a shield or as the sharpest blade I owned. 2 weeks after I signed the papers, the inevitable arrived. A bright orange foreclosure notice flapped on the front door of Gavin's $1.4 million home. The county seal stamped across the top like a brand. By mid-afternoon, a tow truck eased into their driveway and carried away the charcoal Mercedes he had once insisted was an investment in image. Word filtered to me through the same network that had carried all the other rumors their credit cards were maxed, and the bank had frozen a personal line of credit inside their house. Tessa sat at the dining table, a calculator in one hand and a stack of bills in the other. Even with her modest paycheck from a part-time marketing job, the numbers refused to stretch far enough. I imagined her eyes darting toward Gavin as he paced the kitchen, repeating that he would find a way without crawling back to me. The pride in his voice wasn't conviction. It was desperation trying to wear a mask. That evening, my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Aria. Her voice was small, the way children sound when they sense a truth but don't yet have the words to name it. "Grandma, are we going to have to move?" I swallowed before answering, looking out my window at the harbor's slow, steady tide. "That's something your mom and dad are working on?" "Sweetheart." She didn't press, but I could hear her breathing on the other end, as if she wanted me to say more, to give her something solid to hold on to. I didn't. Not yet. After we hung up, I sat at my desk, staring at the neat rows of trust fund statements, investment portfolios, and property deeds. I had the means to stop their slide in an instant. But the question was whether stepping in now would save them, or simply reset the same cycle I'd been trying to break. I called Gavin and Tessa the next morning, my voice calm but firm. "Come to the house tonight, both of you." I didn't wait for them to agree before hanging up. By early evening, their car pulled into my gravel drive. I met them at the door and led them into the kitchen, the scent of fresh-baked bread still hanging in the air. The table was set simply butter, jam, a pot of tea, but there was nothing soft about what I was about to say. "I'm going to make you an offer," I began, folding my hands on the table. "I'll cover Aria and Miles's tuition, their medical care, clothing, and activities. I'll start college funds for both of them." Tessa's shoulders loosened slightly, but I didn't give her time to relax. "I will not pay your house payment, your car loans, or any luxury expenses. That part of your life ends now." Gavin shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. "So, you'll help the kids. But leave us, yes," I cut in. "And there are conditions. First, you will make a public acknowledgement of my 12 years of support. Second, you will apologize to me and to anyone you misled with your version of events. Third, you will attend monthly family dinners here, at my table." Tessa glanced at Gavin, her eyes flickering between hope and dread. "You have 48 hours to decide," I said. "After that, the offer disappears." Silence filled the room. I reached for the bread knife, slicing through the warm crust as though the conversation were already over. Gavin sat back, staring out the window at the harbor, and Tessa kept her gaze on the table. When they finally left, the air in the kitchen seemed clearer. I rinsed the teacups, dried my hands, and knew that somewhere in their house tonight, two very different arguments would begin, one fueled by pride, the other by survival. That night, I imagined the scene unfolding in their rented townhouse kitchen. Tessa would be at the table, laptop open, stacks of bills spilling into every available space. Gavin would be pacing, his hands in his hair, voice rising and falling like waves in a storm. I'm not standing in front of the whole town to humiliate myself. He'd be saying, "Not for her. It's not about her." Tessa would snap back, punching numbers into the calculator. "It's about the fact that we have 2,600 coming in and over 7,000 going out. Do you understand that math?" His answer would be to mutter something about finding another investor. But she'd already run through those options. No one was going to throw money into a sinking ship. Somewhere down the hall, their voices carried to the small bedroom Aria and Miles shared. Miles, only 7, leaned toward his sister, and whispered, "Maybe we should have said thank you more." Those words, I was told later, stopped Gavin mid-sentence. They hung there, heavier than the foreclosure notice taped to the kitchen corkboard. By morning, the tension had settled into something quieter, more dangerous. They ate breakfast in near silence, the children watching them like weather vanes waiting to see which way the wind would turn. The deadline loomed hours now, not days. The bank's clock didn't care about family pride or hard feelings. It only cared about numbers, and theirs had already run out. As the morning sun stretched across the harbor, I moved through my own kitchen, the kettle warming on the stove. I had no idea whether the sound of tires in my driveway would come before the bank's pen crossed the final line in their file. But I suspected that whatever happened next, the decision they made today would mark the moment their lives split into before and after. By mid-morning on the deadline day, their car crunched up my gravel drive. Gavin stepped out first, his suit rumpled. Tessa close behind with the children in tow. They filed into my living room, the air thick with what hadn't yet been said. Gavin reached into his jacket pocket and unfolded a single sheet of paper. His voice was steady, though quieter than I'd ever heard it. He read a short apology to me, to our community, to those he'd misled. When he finished, he signed a second document I'd prepared, authorizing the local paper to print a letter acknowledging my 12 years of support. I made the call to the bank while they sat in silence. The payment was processed. The foreclosure halted the last house payment I would ever make for them. I hung up the phone and didn't need to say it again. They knew. 4 months later, the changes were visible. Gavin's firm operated lean, every expense scrutinized. Gone were the business trips to luxury resorts. Now, he negotiated vendor contracts personally. Tessa had taken a part-time job at a boutique, learning to manage their household finances with care instead of assumption. The children thrived. Arya joined the debate team. Miles brought home perfect scores on his spelling tests. They both understood, in the way children can when they see without being told, that their stability came because their grandmother had stepped in on her terms. One crisp autumn evening, we gathered around my dining table for our monthly dinner. Laughter was easier now, conversation gentler. As we passed around roasted vegetables, Arya looked at me and asked, "Grandma, are you proud of us now?" I set down my fork, meeting her eyes. "Very proud," I said, "because you've learned the one thing money can't buy, respect." For a moment, no one spoke. Then Gavin nodded, almost to himself, and Tessa reached for his hand. The room felt lighter, though I knew time would tell whether these changes had taken root for good. The work of rebuilding trust had only begun. But for the first time in years, it felt possible.